Welcome back to the interview with Russell Earl Magowan. This is part 2, and we'll just continue with your story.
Yes, to continue my story. I was in the Navy from 1936 to 1940. That was 4 years. And I went training in Newport, Rhode Island. And from there I was transferred, as I said before, to the USS Oregon. Well, being a deckhand, as I said, I asked to get into the radio gang, eventually learned the code, and now I'm in the radio gang. And this radio gang on this ship, being it had an admiral, it had 8 radio positions. 8 men were on duty copying circuitry at a time. And I was assigned to one of the spots, and mine was 500 kilocycles, which was the international distress frequency for all ships. I copied every single thing I heard on a typewriter on a log, and then I submitted that to the watch at the end of the watch, which was a 4-hour period. I didn't have to swab decks anymore or scrub bulkheads. That was a thing of the past. This was a very nice job, clean, and I enjoyed it very much. And anyway, I was on that ship for, I presume maybe 8 months. And then I was transferred to the USS Utah, which was an old battle wagon. In fact, it was one of the oldest ones. And it was used for target practice. Airplanes would fly over and they'd drop sand bombs on it. The crew would all be down below, the hatches closed. And this was off San Clemente Island down near San Diego, where we had the maneuvers. And then we'd also tow targets behind, which would be maybe 200 feet behind, and the ships would fire onto those targets. So this actually was being utilized as a ship for practice. And I was only on that ship for 2 months. Then I was transferred to a brand new ship, which was coming around from Philadelphia. It had just been built. It was the USS Cimarron, an oil tanker, and it was a nice one. It, being brand new, it would do 23 knots, empty, and make a long story short, it got into the harbor there in San Pedro, and I went aboard, and I became a full-time radio operator. We only had 2 radio operators. John, who was an older man, I considered him old at the time. He was about 45, and I was only about 18, I presume, 17, 18. And I stood a full watch. And when my watch was up, I'd run down the catwalk, which was about 400 feet long, and I'd go down below the poop deck where our bunk was, and John would be up in the upper bunk, and maybe we just left San Pedro, for instance, and I'd shake John and say, "John, time to go on watch." And John would say, "Ooh," and I'd say, "Oh, he's drunk." He was so drunk he didn't know where he was, so I'd go right back up, and I'd take his watch, and I'd let him sign the log later, so to cover for him. I didn't tell anybody, but I stood some pretty long watches on that ship. And that particular ship, the captain, he didn't particularly like me because I had long hair. I was real proud of my hair, and regulation haircut was 2 inches, and I hated that because I didn't look well, I didn't think. So, but he always, on inspection, would have me go to the barber to get my hair cut. So anyway, he ran a lot of the men on that ship off, even old-timers. He was a pretty hard man. He was hard on the crew, very hard. But anyway, on my time off, I'd go ashore, and I bought a Model A Ford pickup. Wasn't a pickup? No, it was a Roadster from a dealer up on Figueroa Street. I think I paid $81 for it, as I remember. And then I went with Frank Goodall, my buddy. We were walking up in Venice along the walkway there along the ocean, and we met a girl, a young lady, and she was walking her dog. It was Lorraine, my wife, finally my future wife. And I didn't know it at the time, but anyway, he went with her, And I told him, Frank, she's my girl, I want to go with her. So he stopped going with her, and I went with her, and she became my girl. And then I got transferred. It was about time for me to be given up in the Navy. In other words, my time was about up, 4 years. It was in November. And so the ship went around through the Panama Canal, and I parked my Model A in Lorraine's mother's garage, and I was on the ship going through the canal up to Philadelphia. We got up into Philadelphia. It was in November, and the ship had to be scraped the bottom, so it went into dry dock, and I was on a stage under the ship scraping. The whole crew. Everyone had to go overboard and scrape and paint and red lead the bottom of the ship. So I was doing that for 2 weeks, and then my time got up, and I took my sea bag, packed all my stuff, threw it over my shoulder, walked down the gangplank, and was discharged with an honorable discharge. Actually, the ship was there in the dry dock to have guns put on it because the war was about ready to begin. There was talk of war for the last 6 months, and this ship had come around there to have guns put on, be armed, ready for combat. And well, I went down anyway, down the gangplank to meet Walter, who was my sister's husband, and he was a policeman, and he was in uniform, and he and I went on uptown. From there I went to visit my aunt, grandmother, who I used to live with before I went in the Navy, and I visited with them for not very long, just a short time, and then my brother Tom, who had been taken in by the neighbor of our mother and father, and he was younger than I was. I was 22 then, 17, yeah, I was 22, and he was about 19, I think. And he had a car, a nice car, so he and I drove the car across the United States. I didn't have very much money because when I got paid out of the Navy, they took me around to where I went in. It was only 30 miles from where I went in Trenton, so I only got paid for 30 miles. Where if I'd been discharged on the West Coast, I would have got all the mileage all the way across the United States, and I'd have had some money. But my brother Tom, he had money because he was raised in a family, and they treated him like a son, and he had nice clothes and a nice car and money in his pocket. But to make a long story short, we went back and we joined the National Youth Administration, NYA, which was a government-sponsored program, and they paid you, I think it was $40 a month, as I remember, and you could go to school. So he and I went to Santa Monica Tech School and for radio theory, and Mr. Brown was our instructor, a very good one. And I got a job. I got a job with Bendix Aviation, and it was on production, building radio transmitters for planes. And my job, believe it or not, was putting liquid dope on coils. And I did that, sat at a bench and did that all day for 40 cents an hour. Then I took a test for Airways Traffic Communicator, Airway Traffic Communicator, over for the U.S. government. It was the CAA, the Civil Aeronautics Administration, and I got the job, and they called me. So I married Lorraine, and we were married in Santa Monica on May the 17th, and we took off for our honeymoon, if you want to call it that, to go to Civil, Idaho, which was an isolated communication station way out in the 30 miles from town in Idaho. And Lorraine didn't like that at all because she was accustomed to being dressed up and doing things in the city, and there were only 5 people in that town. They lived at the local gas station. And then, of course, the 4 operators who were living in their quarters on the station, and the chief and his wife, they had separate quarters on the other side of the station, furnished by the U.S. government.